Well, for being here. My name is Randy Mastro. I am the chair of Citizens Union. So pleased to be joined here today by so many fellow board members and our great staff. This is a particularly timely and appropriate breakfast conversation with a great New Yorker, a great public official, a professional in every sense of the term, decades of dedicated leadership in Washington and New York, to talk about what I think is one of the most important and challenging jobs in government, because it's not state government, it's not city government, it's a position that serves multiple masters, including all of you who, like me, take the subway. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from our special guest. First, a word about Citizens Union. It's our 125th anniversary. 125 years of private citizens banding together and demanding of their government honesty, integrity, ethics, accessibility, transparency, and accountability. We deserve that. And we've had to fight for it for 125 years. Nonpartisan, always urging our government officials to do better. Express your preferences and endorsements for candidates, taking issue positions consistent with our mission. And I should say, I don't think our mission has ever been more important than it is today. And that it has been in these recent years, where literally our democracy has been at stake at the federal level and so often at the state and local level. We here in New York face enormous challenges. We're once again going through a period where there has been scandal and shame in Albany that led to dislocation. We have one of the most important gubernatorial races we've had in years. We have a new mayor whose enthusiasm is palpable and needs support and needs help of every New Yorker. Now's the time to band together. Not only demand that our government do better, but to help our government do better. And in that regard, we are honored here today to have with us Janno, Lieber, who is someone who has served in government in multiple capacities, going back to the Koch administration, the Washington and Clinton administration, who oversaw one of the most important projects, the rebuilding down at Ground Zero, incredible project, and whose work now at the MTA so vitally important to the future of our city and state. So I'm not going to take any more time talking about this. I'm going to turn the program over to Ben Max of Gotham Gazette, who's going to moderate today's discussion and introduce our special guest. But I would be remiss if I didn't point out he's already been recognized by Citizens Union as one of our Gotham greats. And we really look forward to today and the future with professionals like Janno, Lieber leading the way. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ben Max.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you for your leadership, of course, of Citizens Union, Citizens Union Foundation. I'm Ben Max, the editor of Gotham Gazette. Gotham Gazette is a publication of Citizens Union Foundation, and your support of Citizens Union Foundation helps us do what you do at Gotham Gazette. We appreciate that. Citizens Union is doing these civic conversations. It's the first one in person in a while. We did a number of them last year by Zoom that I had the honor of moderating. There were some great discussions. The videos of those are online. If you want to watch any of them, we covered a wide range of topics, including, I believe the last one was a really good analysis of what happened in the mayoral race last year, and that's always worth revisiting as we watch the new mayor, as Randy said, get going here, and now be 6 months into his term. But these civic conversations are great events. There's going to be not only Janno Lieber of the MTA this year, but future guests are going to include First Deputy Mayor Lorraine Grillo, New York City Council Speaker Adrian Adams, and Governor Kathy Hochul in the coming months. So stay tuned for information about those. These continue to be free and open to the public, but of course your support of Citizens Union, Citizens Union Foundation is Appreciate it. Janno Lieber is with us today, the chair and CEO of the MTA, responsible, as Randy said, for how we get around in New York City and beyond. And we're very pleased to have Janno with us today. Janno is going to give some introductory remarks, and then I'm going to ask him some very, very challenging questions that he's ready for. And we're going to hear more from Janno about his vision for the future, a lot of the challenges that the city, state, and MTA and region are facing, but also some of the real bright spots, including lots of federal money that's come our way and much more. So Janno, come on up and then we'll chat.
We do an experiment. I'm going to do it off of my iPhone. We're struggling with the text a little bit, which we put together. There is some news here today. I'm going to share it with you. We're revising a little bit from last time. I thank you for having me. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. I'm honored to be back here only a few short years after I was the fundraising honoree of Citizens Union. But there's a lot of connection. The Citizens Union, for me, somebody who grew up in New York, who was involved off and on with the political world, always represented what we all want from our civic conversation, which is a lot of people who don't have an agenda, who aren't selling a product, who aren't necessarily passive ideological warriors. We're thinking about how do we have a more successful municipal government and a more cohesive city, and how do we plan as a team for our city's future. So Citizens Union owns that brand, and it's always a treat to be back with you. I was asked to give a little update on MTA. We're obviously going to have conversations back and forth. Despite what you might be expecting, I don't think it ought to be all doom and gloom. We have serious issues, serious challenges, especially when it comes to our budget and subway safety. But there's a lot to be hopeful about. If you're a New Yorker, you've seen the city go through challenges and come back again and again. I know this group has some of that in their blood. But I think there's reasons to be hopeful, in part because we at the MTA are attacking the big issues. And here's something that is news. One of the most significant challenges the MTA has struggled with for 117 plus years is how to make the subway system ADA accessible. It took 30 years for us to do only 100 priority stations, more than everybody else in America, but still way short of where we want to be when we have 472 stations. But we, in the last few years, have broken the mold. We've changed things. We finished upgrades at 15 stations just at the beginning of COVID. We've got 30 plus in actual progress right now. Construction, procurement. We have a commitment to 70 stations in the current capital program. Think of that, 30, it's like more than half of what got done in 30 years, 70 stations. We made it clear that we're willing to attack this long-standing shortcoming of our system. It's becoming a bigger issue as New York ages. We need to make the system truly accessible for people who are not only for our disabled vehicles, but also for older people with mobility issues, and for, God willing, forever, the burgeoning population of New Yorkers who are raising children here and marching around the city with strollers. So now today, we're taking the next giant leap. It's going to be announced in the next couple of hours that we have come to an agreement to settle the long-standing class action lawsuits with disability advocates who have been suing the MTA for some years now. And the deal, which I'll be signing off on in just a couple hours, includes a commitment to maintain the same level of investment in accessibility as we have in the current capital program. And that we're going to keep doing it. And we're binding the MTA with Governor Hochul's full support, we're binding the MTA to keep at this pace until at least 95% of the stations are outfitted with elevators and ramps, and otherwise made ADA accessible. There's no equity in New York without the MTA. People talk about equity in politics and government. The MTA is the centerpiece of that agenda. Our already fully accessible bus network and our busy paratransit service, imperfect, but carrying a hell of a lot of riders. They're doing a good job of serving our disabled neighbors, but they're not enough. The subway system is the crown jewel of New York City mass transit. It's by far the biggest system of its kind in the Americas, and it has to be accessible to everyone. So today, we're making that commitment. I want to recognize Carmel Arroyo as the MTA's Chief Accessibility Officer. Along with the new General Counsel of the MTA, Paige Graves, and Tim Mulligan, one of the leaders of our capital program that have been working on this for many weeks almost since I took the chair. It was the commitment that we decided to make to try to get this behind us, and it is an incredible milestone. Thank you for what you did. So there's another monster issue that others have shied away from that we're taking on. Again, with Governor Hochul's strong support, congestion pricing. We all know that we'll never be able to achieve our climate or air quality goals or truly prioritize street space for the types of vehicles that we must have to have a functioning city. Buses, paratransit vehicles, police, fire, and sanitation. We need those to be prioritized in the use of our street space. And we can't do it until we have a system that disincentivizes private, single occupancy vehicles from clogging up the central business district. So now, despite it being an election year, we're pushing forward on congestion pricing. We're working through the issues that we have with USDOT. They're technical, they're complicated, they're somewhat bureaucratic, but we are getting through them. And we're going to get it done and planning for implementation next year. The third big issue, modernizing, expanding our aging subway system. Historically, MTA capital programs necessarily focus principally on state of good repair, how to put the Humpty Dumpty back together. Tom Smith worked with Bob Kyle, all those years. There's a lot of that. But the historic 2020 to 2024 plan, which we're in the middle of, lost a year to COVID, but we're in the middle of it, is not only 50% larger than all the prior capital programs, but it includes long delayed initiatives like installing modern signals so our subway system can run more trains safely closer together, and transitioning to zero emission all electric bus fleet, and again, that $5+ billion investment in ADA accessibility, unprecedented, transformative investments. Not to mention that the capital program also makes room for mega projects like Metro North Penn Access, which will transform the existing Amtrak rail line, which runs from Penn Station up to New Haven and on to Boston, into a commuter railroad line so that everybody in the East Bronx who's isolated from the mass transit system, Co-op City, Harchester, Morris Park, has actually access to mass transit system. If you're in Co-op City, you're taking an express bus that may take an hour and a quarter to get you a job in Midtown, but no access to what might be a most convenient job in White Plains or even in Connecticut. This will change that. So it's going to connect those Bronx neighborhoods to jobs, education, and opportunity all over the region. We're also prioritizing buses. I mentioned that our push is underway to get to a zero emissions fleet, but just as important, we're redrawing the route map, the service map. Do you know that a lot of routes in New York still go to trolley barns that ceased to exist 100 years ago? I mean, literally, we've been sitting on the same bus system forever. And now we're taking the initiative to redraw the bus system, borough by borough, to create faster routes with better connections. It's no secret that buses, as I said yesterday, in the Bronx, are the true engines of equity. The only mass transit available in a lot of neighborhoods, especially in Queens, which, because of history, has less subway service than some of the other boroughs. And we have to make sure that buses get people where they're going, whether they're getting to a subway or a commuter rail line to get to a job or school, or just to move around the city. They have to be, I've set this incredibly high goal. Buses have to be faster than walking. We agree on that. That's our goal for MTA buses. It's not where, I mean, if you're following the bus on cross town on some routes, not this 14th Street where we have a true bus route, but in other places where there aren't bus lanes, or even worse, where the bus lanes are blocked by delivery vehicles and individuals. I don't want to call out, I would never call out companies individually like Fresh Direct or UPS, but you know, we have to disincentivize. I was actually talking to the mayor about it. We have to disincentivize some of these companies who have built into their business model that they're going to pay $1 million worth of tickets every year for blocking the bus lane. We got to get over that. And the mayor has committed to 150 miles of bus lanes in his first term. Now, just when I knew the prior DOT commissioner, guy named Hank Gutman, and together we made a commitment that we're going to up the number of bus lanes, and we're going to do at least 20 miles a year. That adds up to 80 for you. So that gives you a scale of the commitment that this mayor and this administration made. But our redesigned routes can only do so much without camera enforcement of the bus lanes. So we're working closely with the city. Amazing. MTA and the city working together. And we're working with the legislature to deliver on that front as well. We have 900 more buses that are getting equipped in the coming year with cameras, so they can take pictures of those unnamed delivery vehicles blocking the bus lane. And the reason we think this should work is that the evidence so far is that if you get a ticket, only 25% of drivers getting a ticket will get a second one. And some notes even less than it's like 20%. And then only 8 or 9% get a third ticket. So bus lane camera enforcement works, and we got to do more of it. So, but everything comes back to the biggest priority, which is getting the ridership back. We're an $18 billion business that's lost 40% of our customers. Our trajectory has been leveling off a bit lately, but we continue to break pandemic records regularly. Last Tuesday, Metro North and Long Island Railroad both had their highest percentage ridership compared to pre-COVID ever. Together serving 365,000 riders. And that was just days after Long Island Railroad reported its strongest weekend total ever, even including pre-COVID. Our latest high on the subway, which is our most closely watched yardstick by all of you and everybody, is 3.6 million. Also, we got 1.3 million on the buses, 25,000 on Accessoride, which is 86% of pre-COVID. Good sign that our Accessoride and paratransit customers are moving around the city comfortably, because that includes a lot of vulnerable folks. So we come a long way from the dark days of the spring of 2020, when ridership was down 90% across the board. And we take some credit for this because we have had this aggressive program of fare discounts. You've all probably seen Lucky 13 being advertised in public space. The automatic weekly, when you use your Omni and hit 12 rides, everything after that is free. We've done a lot of discounting to try to bring back customers on the commuter railroads. And as I suggested with the stats just now, it actually seems to be working as well. However, we're still left with a massive, here is really where we're all going to need to team up. We're still left with a massive COVID cost $2 to $3 billion hole in our operating budget that we are going to need our partners in government to address. I'm confident that they will. We've had great leadership in Albany on transit issues. But I know the MTA board has a statutory and a fiduciary obligation to adopt a balanced budget. And we do not want that board to be forced to use their last resort options to get there. Service cuts, fare hikes, layoffs. We need a new financial plan, and we need Albany to get us there. Because we have to, in order to bring the economy back to life and achieve our equity goals, we cannot compromise with, we have to have reliable, frequent service. We have twice the density of Boston, Chicago, 9 times the density of Phoenix, Houston, and other Sunbelt cities. We can only do our New York thing if we have great mass transit. So for the MTA to deliver, the bottom line is we need a new financial model that recognizes that public transit is an essential service equivalent to inspiring and sanitation. Full stop. It's not a business that should be dependent on business. That's the switch that we need leadership in this state and elsewhere. So with that, let me open it up to questions and join Ben on the local program.
It's cool. Thank you, Janno, for those remarks. So I want to follow up on a number of things that you said, but let's zoom way out first. Last summer, change in the governor's office, you're acting MTA chair and CEO. Governor Hochul's coming in, she's making a lot of personnel decisions. Did you have to make your case to her to keep you and nominate you? And if so, what did that sound like? What is the sort of big picture, Janno Lieber leadership of the MTA vision that you would pitch to a governor or anybody else you're approaching as a steward and investor in the MTA?
How about last minute stand? No, I mean, seriously, this is an easy conversation. I mean, Governor Hochul and I knew each other a little bit because she had obviously represented the state in a lot of different ceremonial settings and events and so on. So we knew each other a little, and it was a very quick, positive. I just briefed her on what we were in the middle of, how we were getting through COVID, what the major issues and challenges were, and kind of got to work. She assured me very early on that I was going to have a little less direction from Albany than
Interference, I'll say.
yeah, and that might have otherwise been the case. But it was quick. It was easy. I've known members of the team, many of them for many years, so it was kind of a smooth transition. And she has been great. I mean, she supported us in everything that we are doing from the get-go. So that it really has not been complicated. And she has put forward a really aggressive program in the budget. I just want to talk, awesome sauce. So much happened in the legislative session, but we were only able to keep the fare at the same level because the governor's budget included hundreds of millions of dollars for and operating. Now, with the way that the financing of the MTA has developed, with ridership coming back a little more slowly than had been expected in the previous projections, we're redoing that, and that's why I'm saying that I need Albany to focus on that issue maybe next year.
Let's come back to that in a second. So if you're leading the MTA for another 5 years, 10 years, what do you want the Janno Lieber legacy to be? What is the, is it that it's a world-class transit system that is really on the level of cities around the world that have mostly over decades outpaced us, or what is it?
Okay, first of all, I'm absolutely not conceding that we're way behind the rest of the world. In the end, listen, if you compare not just the caliber and frequency of service and the breadth of the system in terms of what it covers, the numbers of stations, we have so many more stations than here. We cover so much more territory. We have so many more rail cars. and we have a fare that's really affordable. Do not, I mean, everybody fetches about the fare. We're all New Yorkers, right? But $2.75 compared to what it costs in London. $1.37 if you're over a certain age. I talked to a couple of folks here this morning about it. That is a great value. It is one of the things that makes New York affordable. New York is expensive in so many ways, but for a lot of people, the fact that you don't have to own an automobile plus $1,000 a year is really a huge affordability positive. And our system, and I'm very proud of the fact that our system is part of that affordability calculus for lots of folks. So, you know, I don't think our system is less than world class. Listen, it's old. It needs a ton of investment. But if we bring it into state of good repair, we have, you know, frequent and reliable service if it is, and we continue to make some of these investments, signaling, ADA accessibility, transition to a zero emissions bus fleet, in addition to being accessible bus fleet, and the big projects, which are equity projects that include lots of people who are outside the mass transit system's footprint right now. Second Avenue Subway. I mean, Citizens Union is an old organization, so we probably have some debates from the time when they tore down the Second and Third Avenue L and promised the Second Avenue Subway in the 40s. In the 1940s, that's how long those people in that, you know, economically disadvantaged part of New York have been promised the subway. That project that I mentioned in the East Bronx, those people are off the subway in the commuter rail grid. So, you know, if we get those things done, and I'm willing to fix Penn Station, which is one of my personal life goals, I think we'll have a lot of people proud of.
And also on the list of mega projects is much earlier in development, the Interborough Express, which would be, depending on what it winds up looking like, something of a major extension of rail service in New York City. Is there another big pet project of your own that is not yet on the list that you would love to do, or is or subway extension anywhere on your agenda? You know, big picture here.
Yeah, the way we're doing capital program planning at the MTA now, I think it's much more scientific and substantive. We're doing is we're analyzing the whole system using what they call EAM, Enterprise Asset Management, to see what parts of the system need investment most urgently, which is most service. But we also, that's for the existing system, but we also are evaluating neutral big projects that are candidates. We all hear about them. There are projects on Long Island where people are passionate, they want to have their line electrified, which is all kinds of ideas about big projects. So we're doing that in a more neutral way. So the ones that we have on the board that we know are coming are, you know, fixing existing PEN. Moynihan is great. We love our Amtrak friends. State of New York bought them a new home. They left us in charge of the old home, which is done. And we need to fix it for New Yorkers. That New Yorkers aren't going to a new expansion of Penn, they're not going to Moynihan, it's stuck in existing Penn stations, so we gotta fix that. The Interborough Express is interesting, not just because it extends the reach of the subway system, but it connects a lot of people who are not on subways to the whole system by going north-south, and most of the lines go east-west to Manhattan. And it deals with the new patterns of travel, which include much more Brooklyn to Queens trips. There are more people who work in Brooklyn and Queens and go inside between those boroughs than there are people who travel across the street of Manhattan. Who would have thought that? We got to deal with that kind of travel, and that's why the governor's Interborough Express idea, which uses an existing rail line, which is sitting there almost untouched. It's a great idea.
That project, knowing that's on the board, is subway extension in Queens, in Brooklyn, on your agenda in any way?
Yeah, I mean, there's some other good ideas. I mean, people have been talking about Utica Avenue for a while. You know, I would say broadly speaking, we're going to analyze these projects neutrally, but part of it has to be connected to our vision collectively for how do we develop the city. The biggest threat to New York, in my view, is not, I'm optimistic about safety maybe because I grew up in the 70s and 80s and saw, our murder rate go down by 85%. So I believe that New York is on a good trajectory. The biggest threat, I think, is like our lack of housing production. So I think we need to combine thinking about transit investments with where do we want to build? Where are we going to build housing and densify a little bit? So, in fairness, I don't think it makes sense for the MTA to start building subway lines unless the land use authorities are also willing to say we're going to build along those corridors. That's the connection that has to be, I think, thought through.
You noted that ridership has returned to a significant degree, but still roughly 40% shy of pre-pandemic levels. Do you have numeric targets? Do you have goals for getting ridership back? You're at 60% now in subways. Do you want to get to 80% by a certain date or by the turn of the year? Are you hoping to be at a certain place? There's some talk that more business leaders will be asking people to come back to the offices a little bit more in September after summer vacations and so forth. Any targets?
I mean, which of us doesn't have a crystal ball and which of us has the right one? I mean, we've all been learning as we go with COVID. Look, we're re-projecting, like my crystal ball doesn't matter. We're doing a re-projection with McKinsey, which did a pretty good job the first time around for us until Omicron hit, and then things started to flatten out. We're doing an update. We're going to use that for our planning purposes. It's probably going to show that what we hope we're going to be back in the 80% range by the end of this year. We're hoping to be back more in the 70s, right? That's where our aspirations realistically are. But the bottom line is it's not so terrible if Lexington Avenue subway at 8 a.m. doesn't mean you have to have a full-on body count with other New Yorkers, right? So we gotta look at the plus side. Every other city in the nation, we did their IT for a little extra capacity like we have right now. This isn't a terrible thing as long as we can finance it, provide service that lets New York in the maybe post-COVID era come back together. It's not the end.
All right, so in your introductory remarks, we need a new financial plan, and Albany has to get us there.
Yep.
That's their responsibility. The governor, the state legislature, they need to figure out MTA financing, or are you going to be offering a plan? And
it's sort of the word of the day is hybrid, right? So a little bit of a hybrid. I think our job is to start, help start the conversation, to inform it with data, and seed ideas and bring some people together who are smart and have been through this and have the expertise to look at these different options. So we're going to do that. But at the end of the day, the MTA has to be agnostic about let the legislative process play out. And so we're going to try to help the discussion along, make sure that after the election, that folks who have to take up the cudgels and all the new session have some ideas.
nobody's going to want to raise taxes in Albany for purposes of bringing the MTA under what you call essential service. What do you see as the possibilities there?
Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to be directing or even owning any particular ideas. Look, the capital program, I mentioned the capital program that we've got right now, which is like $55 billion, but the others were before were in the low $30 billion range. And they did it with a couple of new called taxes, but fees on that captured some value from internet sales and from the mansion tax. Nobody's crying in their ear about the internet sales tax, the mansion tax, and they did it with congestion pricing. So there was some good policy supporting it as well. So I'm confident that when folks start to dialogue about this, new ideas will emerge, and then there are ones that want to keep the state's economic reserve.
At some point, you're going to have to presume fair increases that were.
Yeah, I mean, Dick Ravitch and the folks who looked at the big problem in the financial crisis there more than 10 years ago came up with the idea that what we should be doing is having regular, moderately sized fare increases that basically try to keep up with inflation. We were doing that for years and years. And I think that hopefully we were able to get back on that path. But right now we need to get everybody back. So as the governor said, fare increase is not the right time for fare.
Any sense of when that might be starting?
No, but it's going to be part of any financial plan to set that path going forward.
When you think about pulling people back, keep the fare where it's at. You talked about service reliability. What's happening to rethink some of that, including rethinking some of the patterns, the ways people are getting around the city, that they're using more off-peak transit or weekend ridership? How are you addressing those changes and insisting on some new performance?
Well, I mean, the basics of figuring out how do we have a more reliable system are the same. And Rich Davey, the guy who's just come on board to lead us, who's a really experienced transit professional, rose up through the ranks in Boston to be actually secretary with oversight over the airport authority and the state DOT, as well as mass transit. So Rich is starting to dig in to those questions of how to have more reliable systems. We have the ability to sort of increase speeds. And part of it is without getting technical, and to reduce sort of the inefficiencies of the system of how we turn around trains, how we crew them. What is our process? I mean, you're talking about 30 seconds, a minute, 20 seconds. There are a lot of ingredients to do better with that. But the other piece to your question is about just how do we do a better job on nights and weekends? Because what we see is that people are riding more. It's a great sign that when people want to go somewhere, they don't have to go to the office. But when they want to go somewhere, they're using mass transit. They're using it more frequently than they are just for commuting time. So we want to encourage that. And that means looking at how do we provide really reliable service nights and weekends, even as we're trying to get all that capital work done. And there's definitely a tension between that because you have to do line shutdowns and do things that are disruptive to the system. So we're going back and looking at that more closely because we want to provide more service when people have discretion.
Mentioned Rich Davey, the president of New York City Transit. Yep. Are there things when he came on that you said with the subways in particular, here's what I'm going to hold you accountable for? Are there particular things that you really put at the top of his agenda that he said, I'm going to get these done?
I mean, it's the basic metrics of how you measure success in the system. It's on-time performance, customer journey time, to some extent platform wait time. I mean, transit. We got a lot of transit gurus in this room who understand. That's what we want to focus on: is delivering safer, better service. Part of that is overcoming the crew shortage issue, which developed during. Yeah, I mean, during COVID, we had we were actually sort of suppressing hiring even before COVID because we had the beginnings of this budget deficit starting to appear, and it caught up with us. And there was huge attrition. We didn't hire for a couple of years, and lo and behold, we were having trouble making service, putting on every run that's scheduled. We've gone a long way back. We're almost all the way back on bus operators, but I think by the late fall, we will be back on conductors, back to full staff on conductors and train operators. But thinking about how do we modernize our personnel system? The challenge is it's civil service, and you need to have people take tests, and then they get on lists, and then they wait a long time. You need a system that is a little quicker to the punch than that if you're really going to make sure we have the transit workforce we need. We have to rebuild all parts of the MTA, which has lost a lot of talent. That is part of what I've asked Rich to focus on. But mostly it's about creating a faster bus system and a faster, more reliable subway system, and not too much complexity there.
The resignaling that you mentioned, part of the capital plan is a piece of that. Are there any ways to make up for lost time that you mentioned that lost time to COVID? Are there ways resignaling seems at the sort of very basis fundamentals of keeping the system running and improving it? So I assume that's a very high priority. Are there ways to make up for lost time or advance that in ways that will have a measurable impact?
Nothing knocks out subway service more than when you have to put people on the track to re-signal. So it is a balance between maintaining service and now look, the good news is what we're focusing on, not just, the impression that people have is they're going to re-signal a whole lot. You're going to go, from the beginning to the end. What we really need to do is to get some of the choke points, which constrain throughput, to focus on that for so-called CBTC, computer-based train control. So what we're doing is we're getting a little more granular, a little more surgical how we're approaching it, than saying, oh, we're just going to re-signal whole lines. I think that approach over time may enable us to get the benefits of more train service faster and closer together without as much as long projects. But it's still pretty complicated. We have interlockings and choke points in the system. There are people here who know a lot about that. That have been sort of suppressing throughput and capacity for a long time, and we're starting to take a more surgical view.
Part of the pitch on congestion pricing was as a revenue generator to help fund the capital plan. With congestion pricing delayed, with COVID, with any other multitude of factors, how are you rethinking that capital plan? What impact is the delay of congestion pricing going to have on the capacity of that plan and the time?
That's a good question. It's not. Provided we keep rocking to get congestion pricing implemented in the next plus or minus year, so that we're building it out. Now, the goal has always been the schedule that we agreed to with the feds after a lot of negotiations. It's like we're in the seventh circle of bureaucratic hell.
What inning are you?
Yeah, well, we're
Seventh inning,
sixth inning. I'm not seeing God bless America. Too much problem with the Fed. But the goal was always to get the federal environmental approval, which we have to get by the end of this year. That may have been delayed. I hope it's not more than a month or two. So the goal is still to be implementing this new system in calendar 2020. And implementation is basically building out this network of cameras and sensors that then speak to a back office and allow you to build people and have transactions. So the bottom line is we're not that far off schedule, and we don't need the cash for the capital program for a couple of years. Where it starts to get complicated is if it doesn't happen, at some point I or we can't award contracts that are dependent on having the capital, the cash, a couple of years later. That's where it could get complicated, but we're not on a hair trigger yet. We're on schedule.
Is anybody going to stop you from assuming this is a go and starting to set it up in a timely fashion where you can really try to limit the timeline here to implementation? Is it something that there might be too much feedback from the federal government on all these questions you need to answer on the process where you can't really move ahead, or could you move ahead significantly in anticipation of people?
Listen, it gets pretty technical. We're answering all the questions, 400 plus questions. It's not just like, fill out the form. These are questions that go to the really technical complexities of how do you model traffic impacts in the middle of New Jersey? How do you assess the number of low-income cab drivers that will be put out of business because you now have congestion? Now, these are like hard technical modeling analytics stuff. So we're getting through all of it. I think the biggest issue is if there's some political mega problem. But right now, remember, the legislature has approved this. So what we got to do is get the federal approval. We have to there's a board that has to set the price, which is based on how many discounts and exemptions they give out, right? Every group of people legitimately is asking, saying, I shouldn't have to pay. My personal favorite was a note from some level of New York State judges saying we can't take a mass transit because the defendants will attack us, right? So you have to let us get free, we don't have to pay the everybody's going to have arguments, right? And And there's a board that's going to go through those and make a decision how to balance having a smaller toll with the goal of having individual groups saying, I'm entitled to a discount or exemption. So that group has got to do their work starting to fall.
As the head of the MTA,
Yeah.
do you have a message to that group about exemptions? Because you hear certain political leaders say we need as few exemptions as possible.
Yeah. You're obviously following. Yeah. The most important state senator, who's the chairman of the committee of jurisdiction of the MTA, Lieber Coney, said, no exemptions. I mean, he's right. I'm not going to put my finger on the thumb that much because the board has to do its work. But he said obviously what Senator Coney is sensitive to is once you start giving them out, it's hard to figure out. There are going to be a lot of good arguments. So, it's going to make it's a tough issue. We're going to have to point that board and get the work going.
I'm going to ask Janno, Lieber a few more questions, and we're going to have a little bit of time for maybe 2 audience questions. It's built into our program, so I think folks can just start to think about that. Just make sure what time we have here. Yeah, good. Okay, climate. You mentioned congestion pricing. You mentioned electrifying the bus fleet. Are there other major ways that climate change and its impacts are affecting your thinking? Are there other ways in which you are talking to top officials that work under you and saying that we need to prepare differently, we need to start thinking about making certain other changes?
Okay. So, there's sort of 2-level question. We're talking about climate, sustainability, MTA. The first level is the basics. The MTA is the antidote to climate change, right? We are bizarrely and counterintuitively the greenest city in America by a lot because of mass transit, period. So we need to invest in mass transit and keep mass transit going as an alternative, and congestion pricing is part of that, as an alternative to the emissions that come from vehicles. There's a lot of work going on buildings, but we're the antidote to climate change. So support the MTA. The MTA is essential. The other side is like, how do we react in our operation, in our configuration to climate change? We did a ton of work, and it's great work, and it's been beneficial after Sandy to protect against coastal resilience. So we have the capacity, because the way coastal surge happens is it's much more predictable than it can be anticipated. We have all these systems that allow us to plug up the holes that are of subway infrastructure and stations that are at risk because of proximity to the waterfront. There is an unbelievable project going on in the Coney Island Yard, which took a lot of hit. It's a 100-acre site. If you're out there to go by, you see it's just massive, and there are like 6 or 8 subway lines that go to that yard, where we're putting up 40-foot walls, steel walls surrounding the whole 100-acre site that have to be buried 40 feet in the ground. And on top of that, they built this huge network of bridges so all the cabling can go up high and not be subjected to water. Because the thing about coastal surge is it's salt water and it destroys infrastructure. So we are really done a good job. I'm sure it's not perfect, but on coastal surge, thanks to the federal government, which invested a lot of money after Sandy, we're in decent shape. The new aspect of climate change that we're dealing with is flash flooding. These extreme weather events, which seem to be becoming more frequent. How do we respond to that? Everybody saw after Hurricane Ida, the geyser at the 23rd Street Station, or maybe it was 28th, but that was, the MTA is actually really well configured to absorb massive amounts of fresh water. Fresh water doesn't kill people. It doesn't kill infrastructure in the same way. So we can take all the water. We ran service a couple hours after the Hurricane Ida, 3.5 inches in an hour, right? The reason we couldn't run the whole system was the sewer system of the city does not have the capacity to take all the water that we're pumping out. That's where at the end of the day, the proverbial rubber is going to have to meet the road, and the water is going to have to meet the river, right? We need our friends in city government. DEP to start to figure out how to expand their sewer capacity. Because it really now, it's only an inch and a half in an hour that they can really process. And they still have a lot of gravity-fed systems that when the water backs up, it stops accepting additional water. So that is where we are. But we are hardening our individual stations and figuring out where the water gets in, how do we raise the curve, working with DOT, who has a lot of curves that have gone away around. So there's a lot of work going on collaboratively with the city. But at the end of the day, we're going to need a bigger capacity sewer system in order to deal with this type of weather.
I wanted to ask you about congestion pricing. You mentioned there's these hundreds of questions that the federal government has asked, many of them technical. But that list of questions has not been made public. Is there a reason that we can't all see that?
And this is one of those things where I have to defer to the FOIL professions. You know, without apologizing or explaining it, understandably, it's been foiled. Half of the MTA press corps sits in the back there on the right. By the way, they really like the muffins. And, you know, they foiled it. The FOIL professionals, we have a much better FOIL system than we had in the past. But they make those rulings. I don't. It has to do with the legalities, which type of documents become official and public concerns. I mean, I'm not
Good
being,
government crowd.
I'm not being shy about. I mean, we're pretty very transparent. I'm not shy about talking about it, but I have to defer to that part of the organization.
You mentioned a few examples of the questions. Any other one or two that has
I
stood
mean,
out to you?
listen. Part of the frustration here is all of this methodology stuff was resolved. It wasn't like we came up with it and then the Fed said no. When the decision was made, when the agreement was set on the schedule for this environmental process. By the way, 16-month schedule. We got 28. Just so that everybody has a sense of the scale. We have 28 counties. But literally, I think it's 20-odd million people who are in that footprint that you're studying as part of this study. Yeah, 16 months. The normal duration for a federal environmental review of just a conventional project is over 2 years. So we negotiated a much faster environmental review process with the Fed than would normally be the case. But that said, what happened was we told them everything we were doing, how we were analyzing environmental justice populations, and use what income levels we were using, and we were analyzing air quality and traffic impacts. And honestly, a lot of stuff that came back, we visited issues that we thought were decided. And now, and everyone's, you know, again, everyone's operating in good faith. We just can't backtrack, you know, to debate what's the right way to study, you know, traffic intersections in Ocean County, New Jersey, right? That is a level of environmental review that we kind of agreed we weren't going to do, and we're trying to get past that. The Feds, in fairness, have been, you know, they understand that we're getting frustrated, that we're urgent, and they have been working with us. They just want to give it a chance to work itself faster.
You mentioned the size and scope of the capital plan, mega projects, re-signaling, electrifying the bus fleet, and so much more. Part of the reason the capital plan is so big is because you have a lot of ambition, and it's also because things are really expensive to do. 2017, big New York Times expose on most expensive subway mile in the world. Lots of examination of reasons that costs are so exorbitant here. Has anything been done since then? Are you looking at doing anything as these projects continue, or as the next phase of projects come in to try to get those costs under control?
Yeah, I mean, that's a conversation that would take a lot more time than we have right now. But I was in charge of the construction development operation when that Roosevelt piece came out, which is, you know, for better or worse, is kind of treated as like conventional wisdom or holy writ. I think it was wrong in many respects. I think it was, you know, the guy is very competent in the work. Was, you know, there was a lot of problems with Second Avenue, so, but I don't know that they were the problem. I agree that with the diagnosis. So, what's wrong with the MTA's construction? Dick Anderson, who ran the building Congress for many years, is here, and he and I have talked about this. That the MTA was structuring mega projects using conventional, what they call design bid build, which means you're a little bit, and you're designing a whole project, then you bid it out, you get a lowest price contractor. And then you spend a lot of time fighting about what the design that you handed to them was not buildable or was not efficient. That was one aspect. So we've gone to the new design build model, which gives the contractor responsibility for finishing the design and creating a more buildable, practical thing. So that is a huge innovation that we have embraced in mega projects. And we just, like, project that I got to start and carry through at the MTA, a mega project, which is called the third track on Long Island, where you're taking the Long Island Railroad main line, which is this incredibly fully developed part of Long Island, and it's a 10-mile stretch, and you're creating whole new capacity without taking any residential property. So you're doing something really complicated in a constrained area. We designed it, design build this new way, ran the project. It's on time. It's a $2+ billion project. It's on time, and it gave back $100 million of its budget that it hadn't spent, so we could do another important mega project. This is a project which I know it's not Long Island. You know, we all think that Long Island is a bunch of dashing Dan, commuters and briefcases. This is a project that makes it possible for people to get out to Long Island because we reverse. I mean, it's a transformative project. It's helping to grow Long Island capacity about 40+% in the morning. So this is, we've already proven that we can do mega projects faster, better, and cheaper. But the other things that I did is we changed all the crazy things in the MTA contracts that shift risk to contractors. And when contractors are given risk, what do? They charge you a ton more. So we changed some of the aspects of how the MTA was contracting. It's lazy government behavior, in my view, but it's giving us better pricing. And we've changed how we manage jobs. I'm not going to go into all this. The result is that we've been getting pricing in the new capital program, which is at or below estimate. It doesn't mean we're cheap, but it means we're managing jobs to budgets and schedules much more effectively. And I think there are a lot of other things that can be done to make our project. We've got a great guy from Jamie Torres Springer, who used to run the city's part of design and construction, took over at construction development, the MTA. I know we're out of time, but it's an area where I think we're making huge progress. Never going to be cheap. Labor is expensive. Working in density is expensive, but we can continue to manage costs and win the public's confidence, I believe, with all the stuff that's going on.
We're going to go to an audience question. Last one is as that mic gets handed out. But you can find, yeah, go ahead. I didn't spend time on safety because that's been discussed everywhere all the time. You're talking about that constantly, so I wanted to try to talk about other things. But is there one more thing on subway safety you are in need of? Is there one more thing you're asking for from the mayor, the governor, anybody else that you feel is essential at this point?
Honestly, the one thing I think is we need to get, make sure that we help people who have mental health issues in the public space get into some other center. That's the bottom line. That disproportionate number, the numbers of people, it's not hundreds of thousands of people. They have a huge impact. Bad guys, we can stop, I think, with the police and the mayor has set motion. I'm not an expert on how to do it, but there's obviously a lot of folks who are in public space, both in the subways, but all over the city, who are having mental health issues. We need to help them get into some other setting because it has a disproportionate impact on the subway and public spaces.
Thank you for taking all my questions. We're going to go to an audience question.
Hi. Just say there are a lot of good things that the MTA has done recently. The Second Avenue subway is a godsend for people. I live near Union Square. It's great to get to the Upper East Side that way. Limited buses were great. Omni is great. But you talked about the bus lanes and increasing those. Those don't work very well on the north-south avenues, at least in the map, as people are turning So I would ask you how you want to deal with that. Also, I think accessibility has increased dramatically, but there's no maintenance. And like at Union Square, the escalator was down for 4 months. Yesterday, half of the escalator was down again. So I asked you if you're going to increase maintenance. We've already talked about people.
Let me get answers for you, okay? Go ahead.
But I do have an answer.
And Omni's a great innovation, but there has to be some sort of enforcement because you're losing a lot of money.
Thanks for that. So on maintenance, so I'm gonna try to, so on maintenance of elevators and escalators, you know, listen, there's no question that the old stuff breaks down, and you know, one of the struggles is to maintain, because as soon as we train an MTA escalator or elevator maintenance professional, they get hired by the private sector. It's one of the struggles that we have, but one strategy that we've been using is that we are, when we build the new elevators and escalators, we are including in those procurements an obligation to maintain them, and the contractor doesn't get paid unless they maintain it at 98+% level. So that has been one strategy we're using to try to force the contractors to both maintain it after it opens as well as the building. On the turns in the bus lanes, listen, I don't want to debate this. I'm not a traffic engineer. If the turns are the issue, we will address that. I just want to get trucks that are actually sitting in the bus lane and unloading their goods out of the bus lane so we can start to deal with that. And the third issue is fare evasion. You and I agree, we have 1/3 fare evasion now on our buses. It's terrible. I put together a panel of a lot of different kinds of people, some law enforcement, but a lot of social justice professionals to think about how do we come up with a new model for fare evasion enforcement. Part of that is we should be redesigning the fare zone, because those exit gates, which are required by fire code, have become a super highway of fare evasion. We need a different physical model in addition to, you know, an enforcement and education model.
One more.
Many years ago, I asked then Mayor Lindsay why the graffiti subways was driving me crazy. I said they're running fast, they're turning a lot of people over a big distance, better than any place in the world. He looked at me and said, "You don't get it." I didn't. Said, sends a signal that no one's in charge. Graffiti is gone, and I'm suggesting that maybe outside dirt is the new graffiti thing. Those filthy trains that have been washed for days, weeks, coming to the stations. It's a bit of a signal. I know this is an expense, I understand that. But maybe sometimes to build establish respect and admiration for the system, something like that should not be just totally set aside. Somehow the buses don't seem to be in such bad shape.
Honestly, I don't know that. I don't experience that. I don't see it, you know, quite as much as you do. I may not be looking. I'm going to take a look at that. And I think we do want to convey that everything's being looked at, because it is sort of part of our mission to give that message in addition to actually doing the work.
We're going to wrap it there. Thank you, Citizens Union, Citizens Union Foundation. Thank you, Janno, Lieber of the MTA. Thank you all for being here.